Hello everyone, my name's Rhoda Roberts. Welcome to the Sydney Opera House. I'm head of First Nations programming here, and it is just such a joyous and wonderful opportunity to call you all to country here on the lands of the Gadigal. We're very fond of the Sydney Opera House. It has an extraordinary history, and the Gadigal call it Jubagali. And it is a place where enormous history and connection has occurred. And to be able to share this space with our brother in charge of the Biennale, well, we think you are. I know you're the only artistic director because Barbara Moore is actually in charge of the Biennale, but it is... but we like to claim a few things. And I have to say, it is really, truly fantastic for the 22nd Biennale that there is this extraordinary commitment to another lens, to the perspective of First Nations, not only from Australia, from our local shores here on saltwater country, right across up to the Tiwi Islands and west to the Kimberley and the Torres Straits, but also to our brothers and sisters from across the ditch, right up to Turtle Island and across our Asia-Pacific region. We certainly welcome you all. What you saw was what we're trying to do in the 21st century. We want to continue the protocol and walk with our ancestors on a daily basis. So when we call country, we ask to be invited in onto the new boundaries of the Gadigal. In response, we get a call and we're invited. But in the 21st century, we like to, build it a bit, make it a bit contemporary. And so what you saw were the women actually acknowledging a call from northeast Arnhem Land with Jakapura Manyaran right down to the south and Yuin lands and the west of the country. So we had the Janawee dancers. Our songman was the amazing Maddie Doyle. Our smoking dancer and performer, Tim Bishop, and the Muggera dancers with Darren Compton as the songman. So can you please give them a hand and thank them for their calling country? And you might think I'm talking for a while. I'm actually filling in space until they get mic'd up. But I think that's happened. And again, welcome everyone. Thank you for coming. Be safe and healthy. And we really appreciate the very challenging times that we're facing on a daily basis. But we still gather and we still acknowledge. And when you see the work of our visual artists, they give us country. They paint country and they sing country. So I think you're in for an extraordinary night. Welcome again, and may I introduce you to one extraordinary woman. What a delight it is to have her cross those seas to our saltwater country here. Anishinaabe woman, Wanda Nanibush. Can you please make her welcome?
I just want to say thank you so much, Miigwech, for all of you who are here, and also thank you to, we feel so welcome by the call to country that we just witnessed and were a part of. Before I say anything more, I want to call Brook Andrews also to join me on this stage. So tonight is the official opening, the public opening for NIRIN for the Sydney Biennale, as well as for aabaakwad 2020 NIRIN. So we're gonna rock it tonight. So part of protocol where I'm from, I'm Anishinaabe, is I have to introduce myself properly. So I'm Wanda Nanibush, Nadijna Mayangan Dodem, Chimnasing Donjaba, and I come from two beautiful Anishinaabe families from a tiny little island in Georgian Bay. We call it the Caribbean of the North. But as you can see by how I'm dressed, the weather out here, even if it's raining and windy, it feels very warm to us Northerners. And I'm really pleased to be here. And I don't know if you want to do your...
Sure. Thank you, Rhoda, and everyone. And, thank you all for being here. I acknowledge the Gadigal of the Eora Nation, of their elders past and present, and everyone else here today. Ngajingang and Daraga. It's in Wiradjuri, my mother's language, and my mother's father's Ngunnawal from Yass. And yeah, it's a really special moment. I'm so excited. I'm really exhausted, happily exhausted. Yeah, really happily exhausted. And the next 4 days are going to be like,
yes,
great.
So you're all gathered here for the next 4 days for an international gathering of Indigenous First Nations artists from over 13 countries. But we really go by our own nations because it's Indigenous land from coast to coast, globe to globe, country to country. But I want to take a minute to acknowledge all of the artists who are here for aabaakwad and for NIRIN. So if you could please stand, and if we could congratulate them on the amazing work that they have done and the work that they're going to be doing over the next 3 days. So please stand up, artists and speakers. The thing with the arts and culture is that we forget sometimes that none of what we do and the institutions we belong to would exist without the work of artists. So they are the center of what Brook and I do. And I wondered if you wanted to talk a bit about NIRIN, since it is the public opening tonight.
Sure. NIRIN, meaning edge. It's really interesting because Wanda asked me before, why did you call it NIRIN for? And I said, well, I can't really call it decolonial, so it's not going to work. Could call it sovereignty. I mean, it's kind of interesting because, we're always pushed to the kind of edge of something, and even growing up, I was really lucky growing up. Well, I was actually born in Gadigal land and lived in Enmore for a while, then out to Blackett and then to Warrington, where the largest Aboriginal population's actually in Western Sydney. On Darawal land out there, and Durrock and Gunnegarra, etc. But I mean, there was also, there were fantastic footballers. I was really lucky to have about 15 Aboriginal kids in my school at the time, as well as my own family and everything. But unfortunately, there was still a lot of homophobia in my own family. I mean, I'm nearly 50, but I think that things have changed a lot. But I think that these kind of things about what is the edge, and when I was asked to be artistic director of the Biennale, I actually didn't. I just wanted to kind of provide a platform for all of us, who felt joy, but also felt threatened, but also kind of sometimes didn't feel like we're centred somehow. And it's complicated, and I think that you all know what I'm talking about. And sometimes you're in your community, then you're out of your community, and you have this kind of responsibility, but then you don't want the responsibilities, then you just want to disappear. And so I think there's a kind of complexity around that, and I just thought that NIRIN was kind of, maybe captured this kind of complexity. And really, it wouldn't have happened without the artists and their supporters. And it just came from the MCA, and we have Starts, who are one of the kind of communities-led artists, and they did this incredible Tamil performance, and the vibration of their drums was just so healing and so incredible. And so I think that's what it was. Yeah.
So this is the intro to the evening, and then we will sit here and talk more in depth in a second. But we have to do our due diligence and thank the funders and folks who made tonight possible and the next 4 days possible. And I do want to thank you all for being here. I was like, I can add programming during a pandemic to my resume now. And I want to thank all the artists who stay and who are here. The funders have come together to make aabaakwad possible. It's not easy to organize across oceans. And one of our main presenters is the Canada Council for the Arts. Steve Loft was a big supporter of this. Norman Armour, who's sitting in the crowd tonight from the Australian Arts Council, was a big supporter of this. He was one of the first to come on board and bring everybody else on board. We have the Canadian Consulate here in Sydney, who also supported us. And the Stardust Arts in New York City also came. Otherwise, we would not be here tonight. So thank you so much to our funders. You want to thank funders too, hey?
Well, yeah, I got to thank someone.
You think that's a good idea? Come on, Brooke.
Do
Get
it,
your
do
shit
it, do
together.
it. Already did it. You just missed
Together.
it. We should get a, gig together. Need to drink a little bit more first. No, I mean, Pascal Berry and the extraordinary kind of team of the Biennale and the kind of collaboration. Thank you so much.
Pascal.
I know it sounds like a total, I don't know, it's a great phrase, but it does take a community, and not, what the funders have come on board because they had a real kind of heartfelt connection. And, it's the first time that we've had the federal government fund so much in one Biennale, and so they should, because it's the first time there's been an Indigenous person as at the head of Indigenous affairs and Aboriginal people in the history of Australia. I think that's very significant. And there's been other incredible funders as well. But I just want to say, a really big thank you to the federal government, the state government, Australia Council, of course, but also the Opera House for hosting us and the Museum of Contemporary Art. I mean, really, these are such great venues and important sites historically as well.
Yeah, so thank you to the Opera House where we're going to be tonight. You're going to hear from a number of artists this evening. What I want to tell you is that this is a casual evening, so you can get up and go pee. You can go and grab a drink and sit back down. You are not trapped in your chairs for the entire evening. We will have a break before our final act with Chris Dirksen comes on, but I do want to make it clear that we're here together to have a good time. You're not trapped in any kind of way. I'm just going to introduce each artist as we go through the evening, so I'm not going to do that right now. Right now, I just think Brooke and I should sit down and have a chat about why we're here,
that's right. We have to do
what
that.
we're doing, and then you guys can go and have a drink and criticize us later. Because we
or if you're going to do it now,
we know
just
that happens.
It's so weird here. Can I hardly see anyone up there.
I know. We were really hoping that the lights out there would... there we go.
Oh, there we go. Hello. People exist.
So I want to start by saying a bit about aabaakwad, which is an Anishinaabe word for it clears after a storm. And thinking about the fact that we are living in constant storms. We're constantly kind of going through processes all the time in our communities, in our lives, that are quite difficult. But there comes this moment, when the sun kind of comes through and it's peaceful for a second. And there's all this hope that fills the air. And it smells good after it rains. So thinking about the way in which as a artistic community that we can take the time when we have these moments, pause and think about who we are, what are we making work for? What do we see important in the work that we make? What kinds of artists do we want to put forward on the international stage? I was also thinking about the fact that biennials and major museums are kind of cherry picking us at the moment. We're like hot stuff on the world stage. Indigenous art is, it comes and goes. Usually when there's a lot of mining going on, they really want our art. It's really weird. But something to think about. But we have this opportunity to present an Indigenous-led conversation to the world instead of just allowing everyone to kind of cherry pick us and make us compete with each other in this nasty kind of way that the art world kind of does. Instead, we're here to support each other and love each other and put each other forward and understand each other. So the audience is invited for the next few days to see some art, experience art, witness art, but also hear some conversations between artists and curators and thinkers, and I don't know, change your whole world maybe? I'm just kidding. We're gonna blow your fucking mind.
That's what we said we were going to swear a lot tonight.
I know.
Yeah.
So it was really exciting to think of a biennial actually being run. Here we go again. Sorry, babe. We're just taking it all over. But Brooke, you're the artistic director of a biennial. But you're also an artist.
Yeah.
So why do you consider yourself an artistic director, not a curator, or you purposely chose those
I didn't give me that title.
Okay.
It was a ready-made title, and it was attached to a check.
Okay, but you don't
and
like
attached to hanging out with lots of people. So that was kind of
but you
the
don't like
party.
the word curator.
No, because I'm not a curator. And even artistic director is such a weird word, right? I mean, it comes with the gig. It kind of, completely destroyed my life and recreated it as it is in the last couple of years. I'm sure you all know what that's like, but anyway.
But don't you do you think you approach projects differently because you're an artist?
Definitely, yeah.
How?
Well, I mean, it's kind of really interesting because, well, number one, biennales are a mess, right? I mean, look at the legacy that biennales are. They come from the colonial, expositions. They, as you mentioned before, they kind of tend to kind of divide artists. There's a bit of jealousy sometimes, or there's kind of like an example of, well, that's from that art world, or that's from that country, and then it kind of consumes it in this kind of Eurocentric view of what and how culture should be. And I'm baffled by the popularity of that, considering it leaves out something like, what, I'll be generous, 90% of the world's population. And so in some ways, when I got this phone call, I was infuriated at the same time as I was like, oh shit, what am I going to do for the next couple of years? I have to cancel everything. But it was important to kind of, reflect on what not to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which...
Well, I mean, when
what did you do, Brooke? Like, I don't know.
Well, I mean, I wrote a list of names, right? Because, someone said I should write a list of names and maybe start with a list of names. And then I realised that, like, 2/3 of those names had already been in the Sydney Biennale, let alone any other Biennale. And so then I made a decision not to have any artists in the Biennale that had been in the Sydney Biennale before. And I made Haiti my first port of call, considering that the Haitians... incredibly powerful. They were the first in, colonialism and slavery to expel everyone, the colonizers. And so that's where I began. And then I did it via kinship and family and, people I met and, went there with, a couple of artists, and then they introduced me to their community, then they introduced me to other people, and then I ended up in Brazil, and then and so then it kind of rolled on, and that's the kind of way it rolled, and I ended up, meeting extraordinary people, like, like Maura Brazil, who's this really fantastic young Brazilian Indigenous woman, in an arts collective in Sao Paulo, and going around literally with her camera and her community of artists, kind of like documenting all of the Indigenous women's kind of movement, basically. And so she's in the Biennale, but she really sees herself as kind of an activist, and she's extraordinary. And then she'd introduced me to someone, and then I went somewhere else, and they introduced me. So it was this really, kind of great thing. And I think that at the time I was in Berlin, and lucky to have a Kunsthalle in residency from the Australia Council. And that kind of was very challenging for its own reasons. But then on my second last day, Mishek Masamvu, the Zimbabwean painter, moved in next door to me, and I just fell into his studio and fell into his incredible paintings. And then I said, right, there you go. And so, this is kind of how it rolled.
Yeah.
Right up until the 11th hour, I was putting names.
I know your trip to Canada came like right before we even began here. So
yeah.
I think one of the things you've touched upon, which, thinking about things from a First Nations perspective, like what would we do differently, I think that this division between, say, activism, art, and other art forms like music and performance and all that, we don't make such strict divisions in the same way maybe as what's put upon us.
Yeah.
Would you say, what I've noticed is that there's a lot more kind of bleeding of those categories in this biennial?
Yeah, I mean, in fact, I wouldn't even use those categories, which is, I suppose, what you're trying to say. I mean, for me, the most important thing I had to reflect on even is healing. It's a very personal thing for me too, because, all of us deal within our families with mental health or alcohol or imprisonment, and it's absolutely within my family too, and my mother's I'm one of 35 grandkids, and so for me, it's a very everyday part of life that we're kind of dealing with. But I think that the balance is to how do you balance that with joy? And what is that word anyway? How is it? Like, is it a dirty word? Are we allowed to be joyful? Are we allowed to be happy? And also, what is that tension? Like, can we then collaborate, or can we kind of be exhibited next to other artists who maybe don't have a perspective, but they understand what tension is, even if it's in an object? And I think that really pushed me, like as an artist. I kind of thought, well, why am I putting in an artist, who's not Indigenous, for example? And what is Indigenous? Because Indigenous, under the United Nations definition of what Indigenous is, leaves out a whole lot of other mob as well around the world. And so what is the diaspora? What is the queerness? What is that kind of, the substance? And so I think that none of it fit into any kind of neat terminology.
How we met in Sápmi, like northern Norway and Sami territory. Unfortunately, none of the artists from there could make it because, those countries closed their borders quite quickly. But anyway, just thinking about that situation where it's a Daidadailu is like 15 young woman artists who formed a collective and really wanted to address like violence in the community through art and through what they were doing, and invited everyone together. And Brook and I were the only two outsiders kind of brought in to participate in the conference. And that's where we met and started the conversation about joining this two-headed hydra together for this event. Do you want to talk anything about what you learned in Sápmi?
In Sápmi, I met the most extraordinary people. I mean, Takalik is, not from Sápmi, but she's embedded in Sápmi. Anders Suna, who's here, he's so generous. He's in the audience. There he is. Hey. I was so privileged to meet Anders. I mean, he's so inspirational. I mean, his work is this incredible mural that he's painted here out at Campbelltown. And, about reindeer herding and just the kind of, but also the really thing that I was drawn so much to your work, Anders, was, the way in which Indigenous people also fight each other, who, want to silence each other. And I think that's exactly what you talk about. So importantly, it's the kind of lateral violence as well between communities, where you and your community, as you said the other day, are now kind of like listed as like the troublemakers because you actually want access to your land through reindeer herding. And I think that, economics and kind of contemporary economics and how it often puts communities against each other, Indigenous communities are not kind of, we're not invisible to that. We're not kind of, we're just as fallible and we're just as kind of, right? Don't have to, you don't have to talk about that. You know what that's like. So, but also meeting Swapantera, who are, a fantastic activist group. They're all, what's it called when you don't want to be known?
Anonymous?
Anonymous, that's the word. See, my brain is mushy.
Actually,
too much excitement going on. Here. But so there's one representative, and they didn't want to fly here because they didn't want to, they did it for ecological reasons. They didn't want to get it on a plane for that reason. But I think that the time there with you, Wanda, was really important for us to experience a coming together on country and on that country, and to kind of have those experiences and to be warmly welcomed.
It was also the first time I was in a area where like everything is run by...
So you're going to say sled, because we went in a reindeer sled.
Yes, we went in a reindeer sled.
That was great.
And actually, it was so funny because the guy says to us before we start going, he's like, if you yoik, they'll go faster. So we're in there, and I'm like, I don't know how to yoik, but I really wanted him to go fast. He gave us a really old reindeer. And this younger reindeer was coming up the side, and I was like, I'm a little competitive, like just a bit competitive.
Very keen.
So then I was like, yoik, 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 yoik.
She was screaming,
yoik, 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 which is totally wrong. But this reindeer just took off like crazy. He was a rock and roll reindeer.
And the other one stacked it, the poor thing. The young one.
And then he just like took off. He wouldn't let that young one by. And we get to the end, and the guy who runs that thing, whose reindeer it is, he goes, I have never seen that old guy run so fast in his life. So he was right about the yoiking.
He liked your yoiking.
But we build relationships everywhere we go, and that's what we're doing here, over the next 4 days. It's all about relationship building and making sure that what we do is embedded in relationship. In terms of your culture, do you have thinking around that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of communities...
I don't know, I just keep doing this.
Are you yoiking me?
I'm yoiking him with my hand. Oh, that sounds really bad.
We had a very interesting time in Sapmi. I kept knocking on the door at 3 a.m. in the morning. No. Yeah.
I have so many jokes coming out of my mouth. I'm just trying to control them.
Don't
go
do
ahead,
it.
Go ahead. Talk about relations.
Don't control it. Relations. Yeah, relations or relationships. I think that having relationships with each other is important. I think that as soon as we leave home, things change. I remember being 18 years old and then being 19 and being somewhere else, and mum and dad moved, and my grandfather died, everything shifted, and the community, our close-knit, 35 grandkids kind of went other kind of ways. And it's kind of really interesting how when, the kind of elders of community of your own family, things shift. But then I think that it's really important to see what are those responsibilities and how you kind of navigate that. And I think that one thing that I've kind of just mentioned before, and I know, you all know what I mean by this, is this kind of intergenerational trauma. It's a real thing for us, it might be kind of embedded in text and words and things like that, but it also affects artists and creatives, but it's also an incredible way to be able to shed that, or to kind of channel that, and to collaborate, and, to kind of embed that within kind of objects, or to, it's like the... we're going to the Pitt Rivers Museum in Oxford, and
the what?
The Pitt Rivers Museum in Oxford. The what? In the UK, which we can't get to at the moment. But it's got a tree section there, a dendroglyph carved tree, grave tree, and it's Gamilaroi Wiradjuri, and it was probably one of the first tree sections that left Australia. It was in the 1886, I think. It was 1887. Paris Exposition. And the sad thing about that is that when these objects left not only Australia but around the world for this exposition, a lot of things that were not bought by wealthy collectors, which was often the case back then, not necessarily some museums, things were kind of left on the docks as well. So I just kind of think about, what is that abstract thing? What is it, the kind of things that when we learn about these, what does it do to us? How does it... It's kind of this abstract thought, right? And so the 3D printed dendroglyph in the Museum of Contemporary Art is a 3D print of that object.
Okay.
I actually didn't think that could happen. And because, number one, I didn't think they were going to do a 3D print of it. A scan for me to print. And then when I talked to my family about it, and also extended family about it, it's really, we kind of had this conversation around photos. What is it about photos? What is it about the power of photos? Why do photos upset us so much? It's because we don't, it's something that is returned, it looks like something, but is it something? And I think we're in this really difficult phase in the last couple of generations where we're gaining information about things that my grandmother didn't know about, and my mother kind of started to know about. And that's why we're so obsessed about our family trees, and going to country when we can. But so there's a whole kind of plethora of actions and objects and things that have incredible meaning. And I think that, and there's also ceremonial acts around that we're trying to embed or collaborate with other artists. And I think that that's something that NIRIN, hopefully, what I've seen happen. So, for example, Manyaku, who's representing Lola Amira from South Africa, her work at Cockatoo Island is these healing spaces with the salt on the ground where you take your shoes off and you stand there and you listen to the music. And so it was important to connect them to direct women, to Marina and Julie, to do a water ceremony around that. And so I think that there's been really interesting connections and friendships that have been made.
Well, do you want to know anything about me, Brooke?
I was about to ask you that question, but you keep asking me questions.
I know, because I'm like, it's like easier that way.
I want to know more about, like, you know, because when we really bonded, we were kind of talking about the importance of hearing each other speak, you know, being able to have a forum where we can sit next to each other, when we can really kind of embed ourselves within each other in ways that...
Embed ourselves within each other. Sorry, just had to repeat that again.
I hope someone's taking notes about this. And so I'm really kind of curious how, like, because aabaakwad started and then, you know, it was postponed, you know, thank you so much, for like a little while just so it could happen here. Yeah. And then I know it's going to have its world tour. But I mean, what is it for you that really, what was the seed for you?
Well, the seed was, I think, oh my goodness, so many seeds. Sorry. I have a really dirty mind, and as soon as you give me a mic, it gets worse. And
just don't yoink.
At least
Please
it's
don't
just
yoink.
like, it's just a little mic, so it's like, you know, I'm only halfway there. But some of the seeds were like going through Venice, actually, and seeing that, you know, there was an artist who shall remain nameless who had Brazilian folk on display in a way. And that really bothered me, that we are still in this space of being on display for others, not for ourselves. Where our knowledge and our understanding of the world and the land is being taken and extracted and used for somebody else's benefit, even within contemporary art. And I was like, enough is enough. I don't want to be a part of that. So that is one of the seeds, so somewhat of a negative seed. The other seed was, you're going to have to stop saying seed at some point.
Kernel?
The other,
kernel,
like a little bit of kernel. The other inspiration is the incredible amount of artwork I've been seeing as I've been traveling around the world. And also, I think Turtle Island has been one of the, and as I was hearing from Richard Bell, also here, you have the same thing here, where the majority of artists are Indigenous. We have the highest caliber and highest productivity in terms of art, and we have the oldest artistic traditions in the world. And that's something to be celebrated, to be understood, to be deepened, and for us to have some, you know, control over that, and how we're seen, how we're shown, how we're talked about. So I think I'm always, I was involved in this movement. I don't know if you guys know it here, but the I Don't Know More movement it was started in 2012. It's still really ongoing. I mean, right now, we're shutting down rail lines, although maybe with the pandemic's helping us out, maybe. It's like, oh my goodness, that's a thought. That the pandemic is helping us shut down the economics of the world. So just thinking about people doing activism and doing their practice from within who they are as Anishinaabe, as Cree, as whatever, and the power of that, you know, the power of the actions and creativity that comes from that, and how, you know, we fought so long to be here and to do this, right? And the fight is still continuing, but I don't see us as like victims of anything in that sense. Like, we're not these sad little people having intergenerational trauma all the time. We are also really intensely powerful, really creative. We're still here, you know, in so many ways. And I think that is something that I find infinitely inspirational. Although I was sitting in, oh God, digressions. I was sitting in Palestine and having this conversation, and then as somebody who I won't name says to me, he's like, oh my God, she's inspiring us to handle occupation for 400 more years. That is not what I was doing. But I am inspired by the strength of our people and by how much we have been able to protect and keep, but also how much we are still growing and changing and transforming.
I want to ask you about ignorance. And like, for example, I know there's been a few artists, you know, in this Biennale where, you know, I'm talking about like mainly the public, but also within certain cultural institutes. And as you kind of were mentioning before, Wanda, about the kind of people, in some ways, I mean, you know, Indigenous artists are also, well, of course, you know, brought in, you know, to kind of fill the quota, etc. And this is kind of greatly shifting. But the ignorance is still out there from the public that come in. Still racism out there. You know, like when you're exhibiting artists' work as a curator, but also being an artist yourself as a curator, are you seeing a huge shift though? I mean, you know, what is it about that kind of ignorance and your experience with exhibition making, when you see exhibitions? What's this temperature? You know, what's the kind of the last 5 years looking like?
I think that I don't care fundamentally about ignorance. I don't gear myself towards ignorance. I don't gear my life or my choices towards helping with ignorance. I think that if you present great work in the communication that the work wants to do with an audience, that the artwork itself will do what it needs to do. Yeah. You know what I mean? And I'm merely like somewhat of a conduit for that. I think when we make art be education, that's a problem, actually. We actually take away from the artwork how it wants to communicate and the best way it can communicate. But I'm a minority in that position in the museum world today. We are being like totally asked to make work be just pure education for ignorance. And I think that's a problem. I'm not interested in that. I have seen a shift in Canada in two fronts. One, there's a considerable amount of people educating themselves about treaty histories, about what unceded territory means, like all of Australia is unceded, so therefore it's all Indigenous land. That kind of thinking. I've seen a lot of shifts in that regard. I've seen a lot of hiring, so people are understanding that Indigenous First Nations bodies need to be in power in most of the institutions in Canada. But I've also seen a rise of the most blatant kind of daily violent racism, in-your-face racism as well. So it's like they're both there, side by side.
I should check. What's the time?
I'm a timekeeper. Dude.
Oh, good. Yes.
You're good.
I'm good. I want to ask you about the word decolonial. Oh. And she didn't know I was going to ask her this. It's really important that you talk about your relationship with Walter Manolo.
Oh my gosh. I don't have a problem with Walter.
No, of course not.
He's a really nice guy.
Yeah, I know. No, but really, the term, because there's sovereignty, there's decolonial, and they function as different things.
Yes.
You know, and
I'm there for two different purposes.
Yeah. So I was just wondering if you could share your own, you know, personal, scholarly, artistic, creative, curatorial, the world. What does that mean for you? Like, what is it?
Well, I think decolonial is meant to talk about all the ways in which we kind of unwind ourselves from colonial power, all the ways in which we give up privilege, all the ways in which we try to remake the world in a different image than the colonial one. And that's a lot of processes there, including questioning capitalism, including questioning extractive economies, including questioning like the whiteness of culture, including questioning like British Victorianism. Sorry,
Welcome to
it's my like least favorite thing. I like capitalism more. No, I'm just kidding.
It's more contemporary.
Yeah. So I think, but I think that part of it also is the ways in which we ourselves have internalized a lot of colonial ideas and attitudes and things like this, homophobia being one. I think like traditionally in my own culture, you know, who you slept with, no one cared. They actually loved it when you slept with people, you know? We were a very sex-positive culture, and I try to bring that back in my life.
Does that mean we're going back to seed now, not kernel?
I need me some seeds. So So
It's going to be a couple of NIRIN babies in a few years' time.
I also like pollen. Anyway, serious business we're talking about here, guys.
Yeah, sex is serious.
Sex is very serious. Oh God, when sex is serious, it's just terrible. So bad.
Sovereignty.
So this whole thing of decolonization is really important. But I tend to think about sovereignty. So I think we have really shifted from knocking at the government's door and saying, like, we need you to recognize us. We need you to give us something. We need you to say we're sovereign, to the position of saying, no, we're sovereign, we're going to be sovereign. It's an illegal position. It's a dangerous one. It's a precarious one. It's not one that our countries and our governments and all that want us to do. But I think that's what sovereignty is. It has to be done. We have to live it, do it all the time. And that's like a position from strength. See? Sex to sovereignty. That's what we should have titled this.
I thought sex was sovereignty.
Yes, oh gosh, I shouldn't say this.
What?
I was like, my mother had 18 children, and I'm the youngest. And somebody overheard this at an environmental conference. And they said, well, your people are doing the environment a disservice by having so many babies. And I said, yeah, well, we're fucking our way to freedom. Yeah. Okay, where to go from here?
Well, I think it's clear where we go from here. It's pretty clear.
But I do want to. I do want to say
Getting sweaty there?
No, I've got a sweaty face though. You want to lick it? But I do want to say that we have some amazing performers tonight, and I do want to move on from this show to some other things.
You want to bring out the poll now?
But I also want to say before we close down this conversation that tomorrow we will be on, these are like, Cockatoo Island for some performance art works in Turbine Hall. So I really hope you join us starting at 11 o'clock until 5 o'clock. Then we will hop on a boat, the radar.
A what?
A boat. Sorry, how do Canadians say it? A boat. A boat.
Do you want to go home?
Fuck off. I may never get home. Like, that's just insensitive to say right now.
There's plenty of time to waste here.
And then on Monday and Tuesday, Monday starting at 11 a.m., we were going to be at the Museum of Contemporary Art, Sydney, for some conversations. So I do hope we see you all there on Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. And hopefully we will also still be here. It's like touch and go every day, right? So I just want to invite you all to all of it.
Yeah, and please do bring, your family, your friends, your mates, your dates. I'd love to introduce Pedro OMeara, who's disappeared, but he'll be here in a second. Nah, he's just making an entrance. And Patrick for being here with Pedro and Patrick. All the way down from the Tiwi Islands. Their beautiful work is, of course, at the top, level 3 of the Museum of Contemporary Art with beautiful song. And Will, who's come down to hang out with them. So Pedro is steeped in Tiwi tradition. His contemporary art practice has its foundations in Jilamara. Design derived from ceremonial body painting, also apply to tutini or morning poles, tunga, folded bark bags, and associated ritual objects made for ceremony and tiwi or yoi dance. So please welcome Pedro.
Pedro.
Good evening, everyone. I would love to thank the staff at Biennale here in Sydney for bringing my culture from the TV Islands here to Sydney. Also, as an artist, myself and a dancer, I do this back home. I also teach little ones back home through the primary school. The first dance is coming from my grandfather, my Amani. Song, dance is important. It's been handed down, and still today, I still carry on from the old people, especially my grandmother. This is my grandfather's song. Don't think that wrong with ma'am. I wanted the work. Don't think that wrong with ma'am. I wanted the work. Don't think that wrong with ma'am. 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 I wanted the work. Don't think that wrong with ma'am. I wanted the work. Don't think that wrong with ma'am. Thank you. The second song is my grandfather. It's been inherited from my grandmother. So I thought I'd bring him here to share it to everyone here in this room. Tempelaya bona temera pan tempelaya bona temera nampangaya mata nenkore chemane ngoro tangere pangamara waya mangora wamanga nampangaya mata nenkore chemane ngoro tangere pangamara waya mangora wamanga tempelaya bona temera tempelaya bona temera nampangaya mata nenkore chemane Moro tangale pangamara waya mongkora wamang. Mana wata mat. Ayolene pararengale pango mamula. Mana wata matane. Ayolene pararengale pango mamula. Tempelaya wona temera, tempelaya wona temera. Mana wata matane mayolene pararengale pango mamula. Mana wata matane mayolene pararengale pango mamula. Tempelaya wona temera, tempelaya wona temera. Napangaya mantanengole manenguro tangere pangamaro. Water mantan. Mayola na parangere pango mamula. Water mantan. Mayola na parangere pango mamula. Tempele yawo na temera. Tempele yawo na temera. Manangayare pani pairanga maningela muror. Manangayare pani pairanga maningela muror. Manangayare pani pairanga maningela muror. Chika putainang. Tempele yawo na temere. Tempele yawo na temere. Napangaya mantanengole mani. Oh, Sangale Pangamara, why among Kora among. Thank you. This is another song I want to share. It's from my mother's song. This song is the Totem of the Owl. The owl is one of the artists, my uncle here, Patrick. So the song from my mother's, the Purantati Mary family, they have the owl totem from up north on the Tiwi Islands. So that owl song belongs to the Purantati Mary family. So Patrick that's his song, my mother's song. What do you learn? Whoa, Marangula Warrior, Marangula Warrior, the Warrior Kawai Pungalayur, Marangula Warrior, Marangula Warrior, the Warrior Kawai Pungalayur, Marangula Warrior, Marangula Warrior, the Warrior Kawai Pungalayur, Marangula Warrior, Marangula Warrior. The warrior Kawai Pungulayor, Marangula Warrior, the warrior Kawai Pungulayor, Marangula Warrior, Marangula Warrior, the warrior Kawai Pungulayor. William Doman, William Doman, William Doman, William Doman, William Doman, William Doman, William Doman. William Doman, 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 William Doman. Rangula Warrior, Rangula Warrior, Rangula Warrior. Rangula Warrior, Rangula Warrior, Rangula Warrior. Thank you. Oh, one more thing I would love to say. Thank you, everyone, coming here to Sydney, learning and understanding of my culture and hearing my songs. And also, I would love to thank Brook for having this such big show here in Sydney, 2020 Biennale. Thank you.